Hey, welcome to another episode of Hanging Out with Nolan Hong. And joining us this week on the podcast are some good old friends of mine. In fact, they've been on the podcast previously in separate episodes, but I wanted to bring them on together today because they actually are co-hosts of their own podcast. And I really wanted to talk more about it. It's called the Body Positivity Podcast. And this is with our dear friends, Arliss Dudley-Cash and Diana Gremillion. Hey, guys.
Hello.
So this is interesting where we have kind of like dueling podcasts going on here where you guys have your podcast together and now you're on mine. But I really was excited when I heard about your podcast, especially when Diana, you're sharing with me when we were meeting offline about it. And I was like, man, what you guys are talking about speaks so much to me personally. And I think for a lot of my listeners, when I've talked to them, when we've shared our similar struggles or battles with our own self-conscious and body image and stuff like that. So I was like, man, I would love to hear more about, your guys' podcast and the conversations that you're having over there. Because I think me and along with my listeners would be just like, yeah, they're speaking our language. They're talking about us. So how did you guys come up with the idea to start this podcast together?
It's funny because we connected through a networking group that we're a part of about maybe 6 months or a year before we really connected. And in that first connection, we were just kind of like, oh, it's nice to meet you, but there wasn't any sparks flying or anything like that. And we didn't really make any effort to continue the communication. I mean, we knew each other ancillarily, but we didn't really have that immediate connection. And then we both were speakers at the International Women's Leadership Conference, I believe. And when I saw Diana speak, I was like, oh my gosh, she's one of my people. Like, she's incredible and she's dynamic and she's so inspiring and I have to know her. And she also saw me speak, and I reached out afterward and we started having really amazing conversations. And the topics kept going back to our bodies and changes that we've experienced in our bodies or the relationship that we're having to our bodies. And one day we both just kind of said, these need to be bigger discussions. And this should be out there for people to hear, because I wish I would have had something to listen to like this when I was, 18 or 25 or 30 or whatever it was. And that's how it was born.
Do you remember what Diana was talking about that really resonated with you in that speech that got your attention and opened your eyes and ears to this person that you wanted to pursue getting to know better?
Yeah, it was when she was talking about how she had achieved a level of success in her life through really pushing herself hard. And even though she had really pushed herself, seeing the impact that it had had on her body with, losing her hair and having impact on her feet and these different things, and realizing that there had to be a different way. And that the relationship that she has to her body is more important than any level of measure of success. And that just speaks to what I believe in too. And I felt that partnership with her when I heard her talking about that.
Yeah. Diana, do you remember, kind of the first deep conversation that you had with Arliss about this? Were you feeling that same kind of kinship and connection as well?
Yeah, absolutely. In Arliss's speech, I recall she spoke about being diagnosed with terminal illness and the ways that it, just knocked her off her feet and completely changed her life. And I thought it was very interesting that as we spoke to each other, we found all these parallels in life. And it was interesting to have these parallels because Arliss and I are very different people. We come from literally opposite coasts. Arliss is tall. I'm much smaller and shorter. We differ in skin color, we differed in upbringing, all these different ways. And yet we found all these commonalities as well that I thought were just so interesting. And of course, it was as if there were the distinctions really highlighted how we had a common message as well, despite coming from completely different perspectives. So one of the things that I'd always really valued about Arliss was her willingness to have honest conversations. So often, when we think about the personal development or the self-development world, there's a lot of positivity that gets thrown
Mm-hmm.
around and not a lot of honesty about how difficult the positivity is or what the
Yeah.
other side of that is, which, is really more maybe negativity or even neutrality. And I appreciated that she was willing to have those sort of conversations with me or talk about the ugly stuff. I felt like we were talking about things that other people weren't quite necessarily comfortable sharing or comfortable speaking even. And so the fact that we just both had this ability to open each other up in conversation and also open our guests up, I think has led to many very valuable conversations. I feel like one of the things that I've really enjoyed about the podcast is the safe space that we create. Both of us work as coaches. I coach in life and Arliss coaches in business. And we both very much value creating safe space for honest conversation. And I feel like that's evident in some of the episodes or some of the topics that we talk about on the podcast. It's, we've talked about trauma, we've talked about depression, we've talked about aging, we've talked about all sorts of things that most people might feel like are topics that they'd rather avoid. And it just felt very important for us to give a voice to these topics and to create a space where we could have authentic conversation instead of just like, oh, what do you do, how do you do it, tell me about nutrition or tell me about exercise and why it's important. It's like,
Yeah.
how do we get beyond and into the depths of how is exercise hard, how is nutrition hard, how do we feel challenged by these things, and how is it that we actually walk through the challenge to get to the other side?
Where did you guys get that motivation and inspiration to open up and be so authentic about these issues with each other, and then also with the people that you're speaking in front of when you're doing these talks, when you're doing your podcast? I mean, you mentioned that many people try to avoid it and are afraid of opening up, at bringing up these things. Where did the inspiration for you both to come from to set aside those feelings and say, hey, let's just open it up, let's talk about it, and let's share these raw painful experiences?
I wore a mask, or what somebody might say a facade, for much of my life. I wanted to be seen as perfect. I wanted to be, the perfect daughter, the perfect employee, the perfect wife, all of those different things. And I spent so much of my life in fear of showing who I really was. And all of that perfection that I had, facade that I had created, because it's never real, right? And what is perfection anyway? My definition of perfection would be different than everybody else that's listening to this.
Right.
All fell away when I got really sick, and I had to let that veil down. And it was really scary and it was really terrifying. And it's still sometimes scary to really show my authentic self. And what I have learned, though, is that there is a cost to me and to the relationships that I build if I am not authentic. There's a cost, and I'm not willing to pay that cost anymore. Even if it's terrifying, I will do the terrifying thing and share openly about things that are really hard. because I want my relationship with myself to be in integrity, and I want the relationships that I have with other people to be in integrity. And it's also exhausting. It is so exhausting to maintain that perfection facade. And I don't have the energy to do it anymore, quite frankly. It's really about being in integrity with myself, and then also not expending that extra energy to have something out there that's not real.
You said it comes at a cost. What do you mean by that? And or what is example do you have of that kind of cost that you said, hiding those things and trying to put up this facade?
The cost with myself is that lack of trust. So having a lack of trust in myself
Mm.
and my abilities. Imposter syndrome gets really big when we're not representing ourselves authentically. And that worry and fear that people are going to finally see who we are, and be judged by that. And it's a really sad and lonely place to be. And that's the cost internally. As far as the cost outside of myself, it, you know, you don't build really strong relationships. You don't build deep trust. You don't build safety with other people when you're not being your authentic self. And relationship is so important to me, and maintaining and building relationship is so important to me. And I know that the connections that I have now are much deeper because I'm showing up as my true self.
What about you, Diana? What were you concerned of before you made that decision to step outside of your comfort zone and to open yourself and your life up to others? What were some of the things that you were concerned with or afraid of that could result in becoming so authentic and sharing these type of deep, intimate thoughts and concerns and fears?
Yeah, I had always been seen as somebody who is very strong and successful. And I think, just as Arla shared about putting up a facade, um, there were ways that I was doing that as well. And I think that there's only really a certain level of success and strength that you can have when it's kind of formulated on stilts, as opposed
Mm.
to when it comes from a space that's deep within. And for me, it got to a place too where those other conversations just got to be very shallow and no longer interesting to me. Um, and so I do think it can be terrifying to be honest about weakness or vulnerability. But um, although I saw that as weakness before, what I really see it now as is boldness and strength and courage. I think it's incredibly difficult to have those sort of conversations, to admit to your shortcomings or to say that this wasn't easy for me. And that when we're able to do that and really um, speak that truth, that's really where people tend to resonate more. Like there's this perfect picture that people tend to put up on social media, on Instagram, all these places, and, behind the scenes, I think almost always there's a much more interesting story to be had.
Mm.
And I think that most people don't want to share that interesting story because, they feel more protected or safe behind the pretty picture or the perfect life, and, everything here is going exactly as I expected. But the truth of life is that it's messy, it's ugly sometimes, it hurts. And I think, especially since COVID and still in the world that we live in today, there's more of a value on that authenticity and that shared connection that doesn't happen when we're just like, oh, here's my pretty family, and here's my amazing job, and I just got a promotion, and we don't talk about the trials and the tribulations that it took to get there, or the challenges that come from within or throughout when to get to where we are. And I think that when we put up that wall, we also are putting up like, even though we think we're protecting ourselves, what we're really doing is we're blocking out other people.
Yeah.
And I just felt so impressed by Arliss's willingness to have those ugly and dark and difficult conversations about what did this look like that was hard for you and all that. And I think because we ourselves do that work, when it's just a podcast with the two of us, or whether it's a
Mm-hmm.
podcast with a guest, that comes through in the conversations, because we ask those questions, and we always let our guests know, you can ask us any of those same questions that we would ask of you. So we're never putting someone in a place where they might not feel safe answering something. And we always ask before a conversation as well, like, is there anything that you're unwilling to share? Because we really want to keep that space safe for everybody. There is something incredibly raw and difficult about vulnerability. And we can have those vulnerability hangovers when we share a lot of what we're going through when we're being real. But I think that like, there's, especially in our overly manufactured social media, image kind of world, there is a deep craving that people have for that authenticity, that honesty, the messy journey, because it's never clean, it's never perfect. And anybody who ever kind of presents their life to me that way, like, there's almost an instant level of distrust that I have. Um,
Yeah.
so it's hard and it's scary, but I think it's like really the only conversations that are worthwhile.
Mm-hmm. What have you been surprised by thus far in doing this podcast and having these conversations with each other and with your guests? Have there been some unexpected things that have come up where it's been like, life changing or eye opening, or just like those aha kind of things?
I think that one of the surprising things is that we're all dealing with the same shit. I mean, excuse my language, but it's true. Like, we're all dealing with the same stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Men, women, people that have a bigger body size, people that have a smaller body size, people that grew up in loving homes, people that grew up in challenging homes, people that have had easy lives relatively, and people that have had a lot of unfortunate circumstances or challenges to overcome. We still have those things happening within our minds. We still have self-doubt and worthiness issues and challenges around self-love, and we still feel like it's hard to put ourselves first and hard to focus on our health sometimes. And there's this shared humanity in the body positivity conversation. And I think that the reason that this is surprising is because most people feel like they're so alone in this area. And I know I have felt that way too. Like, there couldn't be possibly another person that, hates their body as much as I did when I was younger, or feels betrayed as much by their body as I did, in my 20s and things like that. And yet it's there. And what's really beautiful about that is that with this shared humanity and all of us kind of coming out of hiding, and sharing that we have these challenges going on, just knowing that we're not alone is such a big impact. Just that alone is incredible and gives so much comfort to people, whether they make any other change at all. So, yeah, we're all in it. We're all in the soup together, and it's okay, and we're human. And when we have those really challenging things around our body, we're not alone. It may not look exactly like somebody else's, but we've all been there. What about you, Diana?
To me, it's like, I think that a lot of times in the podcast, when we're listening actively to our guests or even to one another, there is a part of us that kind of latches on to those sticky moments, those tough times. And I remember, like, one of my mentors, she always says, we don't have shared experiences, but we do have shared emotions. And that has always stuck with me. It's like, maybe somebody else's experience, Arliss and I have had very different experiences of self-worth and body image and all that. But that shared vulnerability or that lack of confidence or that uncertainty about ourselves or the fear that you could feel or the loss of control, everyone has some version of that. And I think that that's what we really look to do is like we pull out those ugly emotions that nobody wants to talk about or whether it's even like I remember at one of our events, one of the topics that we brought up in a forum space was that when a lot of times when you're doing healing work or when you're doing self-development work, that it can feel very lonely because some of the people who were with you on your journey up until now who might not be doing that work, like they don't resonate with you the same way, or you can feel kind of alienated from the people that you grew up with or that were on the journey with you at a point. And so there can be that sense of like loss that we have. And for every single one of us, that looks different. But if we've been on that journey, we can kind of sense that, yeah, like it seemed like, these people were no longer a part of my life. And so even if it doesn't happen the same way for all of us, again, we may not have the shared experience, we do have the shared emotion. And so that's what we really look to draw is what are those shared ugly emotions that nobody wants to talk about? And like, it's as if Arliss and I have like a radar for it. We're like, oh, what was that? And we pull it out in a way that also allows our guests to feel safe to really share their truth. And I think that that's what makes a podcast very different.
And you mentioned having the different guests on your podcast. What kind of guests are you bringing on, and who are you having on here to have these conversations with you?
We have a lot of folks within the health and wellness space or people who have been on their own form of journey around body positivity. It's been different business owners. Really what we look for most is someone who's willing to have an honest conversation. So if somebody is unwilling to talk about their challenges or, they just basically want to sell a product or tell us their 5-step system without really delving into, where they themselves have felt challenged, that is never a really good fit for us and for the podcast. Like to me, it really can be anybody on there as long as they're willing to speak like honestly about that ugly stuff. Because again, Arliss and I we have the radar where we're like, like where is this? Where can we pull out that shared emotion of vulnerability, difficulty? And how do we go from that to courage, to growth, to hope, to whatever it is that, ends up being far more expansive for us.
Mm-hmm.
I also think that we look for people who physically look different than the other people we've had on as guests. We want there to be diversity. We want there to be we want to elevate voices that are not typically being focused on in this space. And I think that that's really important because a lot of the voices in the health and wellness industry are, skinny white women, which there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, a lot of my friends fall into that demographic, and they're absolutely lovely people, and wonderful people. And we want to hear from the other voices too. We want it to be normal that people of color are being represented, that people that consider themselves gender queer are being represented, that have different body types are being represented and can really speak to that experience. And so that there can be an understanding. And we can also have that shared community feeling, even though we are specifically bringing on guests that are different than what would be typically expected in the health and wellness space.
Right. And that goes back to your whole point of bringing that shared understanding, shared experiences, finding similarities. And in the example of your two's relationship, having so many physical differences and cultural differences and upbringing differences, yet you guys have such a connection because you connect on that level of emotions and feelings, and that's where I think what you're describing, I think it sounds like you're trying to emulate that within your guests being on there to connect that with your audience as well, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And one thing that's really interesting that Diana and I talk about on occasion is as we were growing up, we wished to be the other person. So, I
Yeah.
was a person that was 5'7" by the age of 12 and, over 200 pounds. And, I'm just a large person comparatively to other people. And I wanted to be tiny and petite and short and cute, and the women or the little girls around me that fit into that demographic were of Asian descent, right? And so that's what I wanted to be. I wished so much to be Diana when I was little, and so it's such a gift now to have her as one of my best friends, and to see her like celebrate who I am as an individual as well, right?
Yeah, along those lines, like I've shared on our podcast before, but um, one of the very first photos I ever drew of myself when I was 5 that I still have commemorated is me as a blonde woman, as a blonde girl. And I mean, I have black hair. I'm Filipina. There's nothing further from who I am than like a white blonde woman. But that was who I saw, or kind of drew an image of who I wanted to be. And
Hmm.
I thought that was just really interesting that we came from completely different places. And I think that it points out that like it almost doesn't matter what you look like. You almost always want something that somebody else has.
Hmm.
And like whatever you have, even though somebody might be like, man, like Nolan's got great arms or whatever. Maybe Nolan's like, oh, look at him. He's got a great chest, or whatever it happens to be, that we all have that insecurity or that sense of somebody else has something that I wish I had, and I feel inadequate because I don't have what that person has.
Yeah, even in a name, when I was young growing up, I just really was embarrassed by my name because no one else I knew had this name. And I kept thinking, I wish my name was John. I'm going to tell people my name is John because I knew so many Johns, right? And now I look back and I look at myself and I see myself in the mirror. I'm like, can you imagine if my name was John? It just wouldn't work. But it's interesting when you even as children we look at somebody else and we say, I'd rather be that. I'd rather be anything but me, right? Where do you think that feeling comes from? Because I think many of us, almost everyone, I assume, has that kind of feeling growing up. That as children, you would rather be somebody or something else other than yourself. Where do you think that comes from?
I think it comes from a longing to belong, and a sense of otherness. So whenever we get our own sense of otherness, which really is our what makes us unique, what makes us special, I think that in our very human desire to fit in and to be part of the pack or to be part of the community, any way in which we ourselves happen to feel distinct can feel like a disadvantage instead of what it truly is, which is a a celebration of diversity, a proof that every single human being is completely different. And I think that for me, like I look at that kind of sense of belonging, that wish, like I remember seeing people on TV and being like, oh, well, they're all white and blonde, like, so that was who I thought that I needed to be too, and wish that I was. And I like you talked about wishing your name was John, Nolan. For me, I actually wished my name was Julia. Like I wanted to, even though she's not blonde, I wanted to be like Julia Roberts. I was like, look, she's on TV. She's this like embodiment. And, I know that there are also ways that like she's probably felt uncomfortable or
Mm-hmm.
self-conscious in her own body or different because she doesn't look like everybody. Um, I think that, yeah, I think it's a very human thing for us to want to belong. And in any other place where it seems others belong or fit in together, wherever we don't, can just make us feel like we stick out like a sore thumb and be a point of contention.
Yeah.
I mean, you talk about wanting a different name. I used to also feel very self-conscious of my name. My name's Arliss. I've only met a couple of other people with my name, none of them my age, and most people have no idea how to spell it or even sound it out, even though I think for me it looks pretty easy to sound out, but I've been called all
Yeah.
kinds of things. And up until just a couple years ago, when I would go and order coffee or order food, I would give a different name because I was so self-conscious of my name. And so I would give a name that was easy to
Wow.
spell, that was easy to say, and just hope that nobody else had the same name um, in the line with me. And they never did. Somehow I got lucky that way, but it wasn't until just the last couple of years that I've started to use my real name in those types of circumstances.
It's so interesting what you brought up about, this inherent desire that we have is wanting to be a part of the pack and be connected, and be the same. Yet it seems like now as adults, especially in current times, it's like so celebrated for individuality and someone being unique and such. And it's interesting to me to see that when you're born and you're young, you have this desire to want to just fit in and blend in. And then when we're adults, it seems like it's more, it takes the opposite direction of like, hey, you be you, like go ahead and shine and bring something different to the world. So I'm just wondering, you know, for you, is that just, do you believe that's just a natural evolution of people, or does there, are you hoping that there's something that changes in the greater, community that either makes this transition sooner or more natural, so that we don't have as many people having these, you know, feelings of self-doubt and lack of appreciation for themselves early on?
I do think that we are seeing more of a celebration of individualism in our society, as long as it fits within the pre-described celebration boxes. And when somebody steps outside of that, unfortunately, we live in a world where things are so much more visible. It's not just the people in our local community that see this individual expression. It's on social media, and it can be people all around the world. And people feel like they have the right to have commentary on that, on how a body looks or how a body looks in specific circumstances and whether that's okay or not. So even though I think that there is a lot more celebration of individuality, I think that there's a lot more fear of being individually expressed, especially publicly, and fear of making a mistake in that visibility. And I think that that's kind of sad. I do think that people are being more individually expressed in general, which is really exciting. And I think that one of the ways that this is happening is people are getting to express themselves more as children. I know that when I was growing up, my parents gave me what I was going to wear each day. Like, I don't remember choosing what I was going to wear as far as clothes until I was probably in junior high, maybe, something like that. Like, other than that, my clothes were set out for me every
Mm.
day. And now, children are getting a lot of choice in most circumstances, and things like that. And I think that the more that that can be integrated into someone's life earlier on, the more able they're going to be able to individually express later as well.
I feel like there's a value in being different now, that and embracing diversity, but there's still almost like Arliss was sharing, there's still like prescribed boxes that you almost need to fit into. You hear a lot of kids talk about like older people and the behaviors that they do is like cringe, or like when we were younger, maybe like seeing people who like who were older, who just like were themselves and like feeling embarrassed by them just being so openly themselves. And I think that there is definitely more diversity, but because of that increased visibility, there's also still that high pressure to fit in a box that is prescribed or that is okay for us to be different in. Um, and to me, I think that it is a little bit of a growth path to find your weirdness or to embrace what makes you you, and to know that like I think it's part of the self love journey. Personally, I think it's part of it is to figure out who you are, what you like, knowing that it's really different from everybody. And yes, there is more diversity and choice and means for us to identify now. But I wonder also if there's a degree to which that results in like analysis paralysis, where, people
Mm.
just end up feeling overwhelmed by the choices. Like sometimes you go to the grocery store and you're like, there are like
Yeah.
how many forms of cereal or how many different forms of like, any singular product. And sometimes that can actually lead us into a place where we make fewer choices or we just keep checking the same boxes or buying the same things because we're overwhelmed by the choice. So I think it will always end up being a dance, but the people who are most unapologetically themselves, I find, are typically people who've lived enough life to just not like give a shit anymore.
Hmm.
Like I feel like that's part of growing up, and it's something I'm definitely looking forward to more. There's still ways where I'm like, oh no, I have to do this because my parents think this way, or like whatever. And I think that there's a freedom that comes with aging, that
Hmm.
allows for us to be more and more ourselves, and through life experience. I think there are definitely people who age and never really fully self-express either, and so I think it's an
Yeah.
individual journey, to loving ourselves and expressing ourselves fully.
Yeah, my mom definitely is one of those who, in her later years of age, has decided, I don't care what people think. And sometimes she should because of the things she says, but that's for another conversation. So when you guys, the name of the podcast is the Body Positivity Podcast, but I think sometimes when people hear that, they think, oh, it's just strictly about the physical outward looks. But what what I was tickled by was that you guys dive deeper into not just the outer looks, but just the body as a whole, and loving yourself as the person, and loving the way you look, and loving the way you feel, and loving the relationship you have with your body. Can you explain a little bit about that, and what the I guess the driving force behind having this particular podcast out there in the world and in the community, and what you are hoping to get out there.
For me, the physical, visible expression of a body is almost inconsequential. I mean, they're gorgeous. All the bodies are
Mm.
gorgeous to me. I just love bodies. Um, but it's all inner work. So for me, the conversation that Diana and I have is not about our physical expression almost at all. I mean, we're talking about our emotional reaction or our thought process or our belief systems around our physical expression or visible expression or even the functionality of our body. And all of that is an internal process. So for me, it's about taking the conversation you know, um, from how do we love a part of our body to what does love even mean to us? How do we accept ourselves? And making that normal to look at it as an inner dialogue, as as inner work to be done, not on changing the visible expression of our bodies. Now, of course, we can choose to change the visible expression of our bodies. I have extensive tattoo work, right? So that is something that I have specifically chosen to change how I visibly am seen in this world, um, and what my body visibly looks like. And it was a whole inner journey to get to a place to have that tattoo work. And it's been a whole inner journey to even process now having a tattoo on a body that I actually really love and wish I could see. Right? Like there are times when I'm like, I wish I could like hang my tattoo up on a hanger for a little bit and like get to see my body in its full expression. So to me, it's all inner work. And getting people to the place where they can see that and embrace that instead of focusing so much on their visible expression of their body.
Yeah, I think of the body as kind of the vessel for the inner work, where it's where we all have bodies, and so and we all have challenges around our bodies, and that opens the door for us to do this inner work of self-acceptance and self-love and self-reflection on who it is we really want to be, how we really want to think about ourselves, how we want to feel about ourselves. And just to point out, again, even just more differences between Arliss and me. So Arliss she's all about embracing the tattoos. I have 0 tattoos. Arliss dyes her hair. Like, I don't dye my hair. Arliss, gets her nails done, makeup, lashes, and I'm like plain Jane, never put anything on my face, like barely wear like moisturizer kind of person. So we, it just, I think that those distinctions, yes, they're absolutely physical, but again, it brings us together in this way where, like, as beings, as souls, as individuals, as human beings, we still have these commonalities, and it really comes down to that inner work, that inner exploration that we all go through.
With the different difficult conversations that you've had, with each other and on the podcast, was there ever one topic that was significantly difficult for either of you to explore or to open up about, or for just to the feeling of, hey, we should have this conversation, but man, we really gotta gotta buckle up for this one, because this one's gonna be tough?
Our conversation on sexuality was difficult for me to open up on, because I come from a very religious Filipino Catholic family where there was a lot of suppression around sexuality and expressing that in any way. And so actually with that, I think one of the things that's beautiful too is that I just set a very clear boundary on what I was willing to speak on and what I wasn't. And I think that also is just a really important part of that diversity of conversation, is that there were places where Arliss was way more open about talking about things. And there were places where I was like, nope, like this is where I feel comfortable speaking about things. And still being in that safe space where I felt like I could be honest, right? Because even sometimes being honest with our boundaries can feel difficult. We may wish we felt more free, or wish that we felt more like we could talk about something, but like inside really not be. And I think that there's something really refreshing as well about just being able to say, like, nope, that's not a topic where I'm going to like open up that much. And it's not from a sense of like sexual repression or anything like that. It's more that like I get to set a boundary on what feels comfortable for me and what feels safe for me. And we believe in creating that, not just for ourselves and honoring that, but also for our guests, for our listeners.
Yeah. And for me, 2 topics come to mind, talking about my experience around bullying. I was bullied a lot as a child. And so, whenever that comes up in topic, it's sometimes hard for me to reference that. And then the other part is, that's been challenging, is the discussion of, white privilege in the health and wellness area. And I'm a white person, right? And so I want to be aware of that. And it's still a scary topic for me. I'm afraid of making mistakes. I'm afraid of saying the wrong thing. And all of those things. And Diana and I still talk about it. And she's she's amazing, as far as helping me, and guiding me through challenging conversations, which I'm so grateful for. But yeah, that's a big one, and I think it's something that needs to be talked about more.
That's really amazing that that you guys have been able to recognize these things, but be able to actually use the discomfort as an empowering tool, because it people might assume, oh, it's uncomfortable, so the way you deal with it is you just power through it and, like, and make it worse before it gets better. And what you've shown is that no, you don't have, like, that's not the way to deal with everything. You've dealt with it with creating boundaries to keep that safe space, and holding yourselves accountable for what you want to, how you want to carry your journey. And I think that's empowering and that's inspirational too. So I really appreciate you guys sharing these things. um, I was I was I was also concerned that if I brought that up, that it would be like, hey, we don't talk about it. So the fact that you guys brought it up, and we're willing to share, that really is awesome. I appreciate that.
Yeah, we're all about the tough conversations and about being honest in them. Because the truth is, yeah, of course, there are things that we're scared to talk about. Of course, there are things that we would rather not discuss. But really, there is no place where I feel safer to have those conversations than with Arliss. And I know that like we both do that work to create a space where we feel comfortable sharing and being honest, and that is no easy feat.
Hmm.
It's easy to judge or easy to say to somebody, well, like, maybe you are sexually repressed, Diana, or like something like that, and instead to
Yeah.
just allow somebody to be all the
Hmm.
things that they are, and and embrace them still. And I think it's a beautiful part of the journey. Is like, it's we often talk about that too with body positivity. Is that it's not like there's some final destination where you're like all enlightened and like know everything. It is the journey, and honoring the steps that still seem a little scary or still feel a little out of reach, as well as the journey that you've been on, sharing that and illuminating that for other people, so they can, wherever they are on their journey, be able to maybe see themselves or see possibility, or relate.
Hmm. And speaking of journey, where do you see this journey of this podcast going moving forward? What are you expecting or looking forward to as you continue to grow this show? What are some of your plans that you have for the podcast?
Well, one thing is that, having a partner like Diana, the sky is really the limit. Anything that we decided to do, I know that we would be successful at. And so that doesn't help narrow down our choices. In some ways, that makes it a little bit even more challenging. And there are always like life circumstances changing, and so accounting for those as well. And so we want to continue to raise this voice. We would love to do retreats. We would love to do more events. We would love to potentially have a class in the future, and things like that, and do groups like co-speaking events together. We've done that a couple of times in the past. We really love that. So there are a lot of options for us, and I'm just excited to see what unfolds. Honestly, it's more than I ever thought about it being, now, not because I didn't think we were capable, but just because I didn't think that far out, when we were first in conception. And so I'm just really excited to see where we go from here. What about you, Diana?
Yeah, I see events definitely being a part of it. Like, that's something that it's another funny way that Arliss and I are connected, is we both had a lot of different forms of event experience, and then we both love to speak and to facilitate. So I see a lot of those sort of things, and we both love to teach. So I see a lot of those sort of things being part of the future of body positivity. But we also recognize that for both of us, it's this ends up being sometimes something that might not necessarily be, the only thing that we do. There are so many other things that Arliss and I are both involved in, and we enjoy kind of exploring where the partnership unfolds as well. So we have ideas about where things can go, but we also are very much open to the unfoldment of how things go.
Well, count me in on that train of being excited as to what is going to unfold for you two. I just absolutely love what you're doing, and I agree. The sky is the limit with you guys. Just knowing your passions and the genuine hearts that you have. Um, I think there's so many ways that you can impact our community, our people, and this world. So, thank you so much for sharing everything. For anyone who's interested in keeping up with you, to subscribe to the podcast, all that, tell us how people can get connected with you and be a part of the podcast.
On our website, we actually have a form that people can fill out if they want to be a guest on our podcast. So check that out. And I think the easiest way to keep in touch with us is to follow us on social media. And because we are always posting our new episodes there. And that's where we do our big announcements. So I know that we have some things in the works, and I'm looking forward to seeing how it all comes to fruition next year.
Yes, and you can find us streaming on Spotify, on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Castbox, iHeartRadio, probably more that I'm not even remembering right in this moment. So you can find us on your local podcast streaming service, whatever that happens to be.
And if they are going to follow you on social media, how do they find you? Is it under Body Positivity Podcast or under your personal accounts?
Yeah, so it could be both. We do have at Body Positivity Podcast on Instagram and on Facebook, and you can also follow us individually. My name on Instagram and on most social media platforms is Savor Life with Diana, SAVORLIFE with Diana, DIANA. And Arliss, I think yours is it Solutions, or which one would you want to share?
So I have two. I have Solutions, SOULLUTIONS, and then I have Arliss Dudley-Cash.
So no excuses. There's so many ways for you all to stay connected with Arliss and Diana, and to stay connected with the Body Positivity Podcast. I am so appreciative and grateful that you guys took the time out to be back here on the podcast with me on my podcast, and for having this wonderful conversation. And again, thank you for all of the amazing things that you are putting out into the world, and for being an inspiration to myself. So really appreciate the time, guys, and so glad we could connect again today.
Thank you so much.
Yes, it's been amazing. Thank you so much, Nolan.